This is Northwest Reports. I'm Maleeha Syed. Today we're looking at an investigation into mounting complaints against a Seattle veterans clinic. Earlier this month, Northwest Public Broadcasting reporter Lauren Gallup and Cascade PBS reporter Lizz Giordano published their joint investigation into a building on the Veterans Affairs Puget Sound Healthcare System campus in South Seattle. Patients and staff have had to navigate a host of concerning conditions at the location, from leaky ceilings to inadequate ventilation during the pandemic. In this episode, you'll first hear the Northwest Public Broadcasting report that Lauren and Liz published as part of their investigation into the VA building. Then you'll hear a conversation we had with them about how they first came across this story, why they wanted to spotlight their investigation in different mediums, and their plans for future reporting on this topic. Also, just a quick note before we dive in. This will be the final episode of Northwest Reports that we release on a weekly schedule. But we're not going away. Instead, we're going to start publishing limited series several times a year, with our first one coming out this fall. So keep following us wherever you get your podcast and stay tuned for that series. Okay, now here's that episode from Northwest Public Broadcasting.
On Saturday, November 4th in Seattle, it was raining hard. Cortez Hopkins and his co-workers were working overtime.
Oh, listen, I came out of my office because I heard this whoosh, and I started taking pictures. That's when I sent it to the chief, and then I sent it to everybody. Look what's happening here.
That whoosh was water coming through the ceiling in Building 18 on the Seattle Veterans Affairs Puget Sound campus. Hopkins shows us photos of plaster ceiling tiles broken on the ground and scattered on a coworker's desk.
When it did happen, you could just see the water. Woof, it just came all the way down. That whole area was wet.
In his pictures, you can see water damage all over the ceiling. There were more leaks that day in Building 18. But the leaks were just one of many problems. The building has offices on one floor and clinics upstairs. According to VA documents, the agency has been planning to demolish the building for over a decade. But today, it still stands. Some VA staff still work there, and some specialty clinics are still open. This after years of documented maintenance and safety concerns.
Hopkins is the deputy chief of logistics for the local VA healthcare system. He started working in Building 18 4 years ago. And then you immediately started hearing complaints about Building 18 from your staff.
When I first came there in February of 2020.
What were they telling you?
That they had no heat, no AC, no air circulation, and the HVAC wasn't working.
Hopkins says he went to staff and facility management about the HVAC system. He says they told him they weren't putting any money into the maintenance of the building because they were planning to move. That's what the chief of logistics, Douglas Galuska, heard too.
They stopped doing large maintenance on it, and within a short time after that, it died completely. We have not had an operational HVAC system in that building since at least 2020, probably 2019.
VA documents confirm that in 2017, the agency stopped funding some big building maintenance projects like the HVAC system. The VA says the HVAC is operational, but it cannot handle big temperature changes.
Logistics staff say the building is cold in the winter and hot in the summer. Sometimes it smells musty. Hopkins says the problems didn't stop there.
They had ants. We had to call Orkin at least once a month to come out and spray for the ants, and we had vegetation growing up through the floor.
Then, staffers say they began noticing what they thought was mold. Hopkins and Galuska say about a year ago, they started seeing what looked like black mold around the office.
In the bathrooms, they had mold in the toilets and the urinals. The carpet, you could see all mold in it.
The VA did not grant a sit-down interview and instead responded to questions over email. They deny that there was black mold.
A third party, hired by the VA, conducted a mold test last summer and deemed the building safe. Cyril Miller is a veteran who receives care at the Seattle VA. He says one day he was sitting in the South Clinic and he saw a big black spot on the wall. When he asked a staff member about it, he says she told him it was mold and that it was all over the place.
But all I know was that building was completely unacceptable, in my opinion, for healthcare.
Beverly Anderson is the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 3197, which represents workers for VA Puget Sound.
Some people were asthmatic, some people just had immune systems that were compromised by the mold. and they could feel it. They were calling in sick because of it, so the move had to happen.
The mold and concerns from employees kicked off talks about a move. VA leadership created a plan in late July to begin moving first-floor staff in August. That plan would take 13 weeks to get everyone out. Douglas Galuska says logistics staff were furious about this.
I cannot go back to my people and say this. They've sat in this building for another hot summer. It's 90 degrees in there. 90 friggin' degrees where we're working.
In September, the director of safety at VA Puget Sound wrote an email recommending that staffers be moved out of that building as soon as possible. Staff started writing to Congresspeople. Letters obtained by NWPB and Cascade PBS show staff explaining concerns about leadership not working to move them into empty spaces on the campus. Finally, in November, logistics staff began moving out. They left after the bad rainstorm caused a bunch of leaks in the ceiling.
Saturday and Sunday, they came in, tried to sweep up the water, mop up the water and all that. And they came up with the idea, just cover the hole with a new ceiling fan. That was it.
But some staff are still there.
And I was under the assumption, and we know how that word breaks down, though, that they were all moved, that building was done. And
when was this?
I thought it was done in December.
That's Union President Anderson again. After we spoke to her, she went to Building 18 in early May.
They're not all out of there. And so I got problems with the agency.
In an email attributed to VA Press Secretary Terrence Hayes, he acknowledged that the building was meant to be vacated by 2023. He wrote moving clinical spaces takes more coordination than moving office spaces. The agency says it is working on this and to make sure patients aren't affected.
In May, as Anderson walked down Building 18's halls, she saw long tubes leading to buckets, catching the water leaks. With her was the union's vice president, Peter Horonek.
So they have these replacement tiles that actually have a drain in them and running to hoses that are basically just emptying into buckets like from Lowe's and Home Depot or garbage cans. And they're these are even in the hallway leading up to the clinic area. So you can see these from the clinic.
They say they saw industrial space heaters running to keep patients warm in waiting areas. The two shake their heads at the building's condition.
So it's putting veterans at risk. And every time I walk down that hall, I'm like, really? There's still clinics in there.
The VA says a number of specialty clinics, including wound care, allergy, and rheumatology, are still in Building 18. The VA claims the plan is to move the clinics out in the next couple of months.
The South Clinic should have been closed months ago. And like he said, the leadership is dragging their feet and getting it done, but I'm going to light a fire because it's got to happen. Those people need to get out of there.
For Cascade PBS, I'm Lizz Giordano.
And with NWPB, I'm Lauren Gallup.
That was the audio report from Northwest Public Broadcasting. Now here's a conversation we had with Liz and Lauren about their collaborative investigation into the Veterans Affairs building. Lauren, if you could just tell me how the story first came to you and why you ended up bringing Liz at Cascade PBS into the reporting.
So we got the tip from someone reached out to us, actually specifically me, at Northwest Public Broadcasting, and said that they had this story that they had been trying to get people in Seattle media to pick up for a while, but they just weren't finding people that were interested. And I don't know exactly what it was, if it just kind of seemed like, I don't know, one of those stories where someone's reaching out, they have a problem, right? And we get so many stories that come across our desk and you can't get to all of them. But I thought that there was something there and I thought it was worth looking into. So I went to our news director, Tracy Dial, and I said, I think that we should take the time and just see if something's there, but I don't know if it's going to be a story, right? Often when you get a tip, someone could be reaching out and they're frustrated or confused about something, but maybe it's not newsworthy. And I was really fortunate in our newsroom that we can take the time and look into things. And so Tracy was super willing to let me jump in and do a deep dive, but I didn't want to do it on my own. I'm based in Tacoma, which is also, it's just south of Seattle, right? Like a lot of people that work and that we talk to are within that area. But I felt like we should be working with a news organization that is in Seattle and maybe has more institutional knowledge too. And so I think about 2 years ago, maybe we started kind of a content sharing collaboration with Cascade PBS, where our news organizations kind of had this memorandum understanding, like we could publish each other's work. Northwest Public Broadcasting has been expanding, so that's something that we're seeking to do a lot. And I don't know exactly what the partnership looks like in terms of collaborating on stories, but I know that Tracy mentioned that herself and the editors at Cascade had been trying to establish maybe like collaborating on reporting projects. And so she happened to be in a meeting with Jacob, your editor, and was like, hey, we got this crazy story tip that might be interesting to you all. And then I think that's when Jacob said something to you, right, Liz?
Yeah, that's when Jacob got me involved too.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to ask Liz, when did you start reporting on this story? And then what was it like divvying up the work? Did y'all work side by side? Were you kind of taking on different elements of the reporting? What did that look like?
Yeah, I came out early on. Lauren had talked to a couple of the sources, or kind of pre-reporting in a sense, or early interviews. So we had some of that to go on. And then I got brought in and we kind of sat down again with sources and kind of took a more in-depth look. We kind of divvied it up depending on timing, and Lauren's in Tacoma. So sometimes if it was something small up in Seattle, I would take it and report back to Lauren. But kind of here and there, just trying to get the story out as fast as possible, just, figuring out the timing that way.
And did either of you run into roadblocks either with getting access to public records or the buildings or the VA just throughout the reporting process?
Well, I think when we first started reporting together, it was hard to find more sources to talk to. People that had originally reached out to us, of course, were like willing to be on the record, right? And had some people that they could connect us with. But this is a story about, the place where people work. And it's also a medical facility. So I find that both of those things are very private and you don't want to necessarily talk about in a public space like a news article. So we would reach out to people and just not hear back at the beginning. We eventually did talk to the employees union, but that took some time to get that interview. We did some FOIA requests and we still have only heard back on 2. So there has been a little bit of a delay with that, but we also got a lot of records from folks that had them, so we didn't have to do as many records requests, would you say?
Yeah, we got one key document from one of our sources who had done a FOIA before, and that was a pretty key documentation that kind of verified a lot of the claims we heard from sources. Mm-hmm. And I think we were pretty disappointed that the VA didn't take the time to sit down with us. We were really hoping for a sit-down interview to learn more about, what was going on and their plan to kind of change things and, move people out of this building.
Yeah, and I will say that was one of the things that was really helpful to have another reporter on, was we've been in communication with the VA for a while, but always got emailed responses and couldn't get a sit-down interview them, couldn't get them to jump on the phone with us. And Liz was really dogged in we want to talk to you guys on the phone. This is our deadline. And I think that really helped when we weren't getting the answers back that we wanted from them to kind of have 2 people saying, we need this. This is what we're asking of you. We're giving you plenty of time, and make that known as opposed to just communicating that on our own against an agency, that has a fair amount of comms professionals, right? Working and figuring out how to dodge reporter questions.
Yeah. We just wanted to get the PIO on the phone.
Yeah.
To maybe do a little bit of fact checking and make sure they wanted one last comment, and they just wanted to do everything over email.
Plus, we had a lot of, I think, information we were finding out through documentation that was made by the VA. So we wanted to confirm and make sure, is there any error made within this? Do you, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah. And why was it important to tell this story in different mediums? And do you think there's anything that could have been lost if you didn't have both of the mediums?
I think one big thing is just the audience reach, right? Lauren has a big audience in Tacoma. We have a bigger audience in Seattle. Vets come from all over the Puget Sound to receive care. Mm-hmm. And so it's nice to have a written piece, but also then it played on NPR and on the radio, which was really nice to hear kind of, a broader reach because there's vets of all ages that also get care.
And I'll add too, like the reason that I wanted to go into audio work is that I think it's so powerful to hear from people that are telling this story, right? Like we, in a written story, get to have those details that we put in and that we're told, of maybe visualizing things and hearing someone's voice. But when you're listening to a story on the air, you actually get to hear that person that we sat down with. And there's that particular quote of a veteran who receives care at the Seattle VA, and he's gone there for years. And I think when he's talking about, I don't remember the exact wording, but just feeling like that building is not up to the standard for healthcare. Like he's reflecting on that as someone who's a patient that goes there. And you can hear the frustration in his voice, the emotion, maybe some sadness too, right? Like he really cares about the staff that work there too. And I think that really comes through in an audio piece in a way that is just different when you read an article online.
Yeah. And on a personal note, were there any things that were unearthed in this story that were particularly surprising to either of you?
Well, I was surprised that the VA knew about the ventilation issue for so long during the pandemic. That really surprised me too, just thinking about the care and the clinic that vets were receiving, again, all ages, immune-compromised people. That was really surprising. And, and then the efforts they took to safeguard against that didn't seem like enough to me. And I was really disappointed to hear that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It was definitely one of the more shocking things. The VA was also very honest too about that they had meant to have this building closed by the end of last year, which like we were hearing that from other sources, but to have the agency just be willing to tell us that, I think was very telling of like maybe why so many staff and others are frustrated about this. I think also too, just like knowing about, this new building that's on the VA campus and the money that went into that, and then realizing that the demolition of other buildings is part of that plan. I think that was just kind of interesting on a note of like, you're going to, put money into a new facility so that then you can get rid of old buildings, right? Like that makes sense, in progress forward and stuff. But that, maybe things were delayed because of the pandemic or whatever, and just kind of trying to figure out all the planning details too, and like put myself in their shoes was kind of, a fun, interesting exercise, and see a little bit where they're coming from and then find out those details too. Yeah.
But it was also disappointing to learn that these people in Building 18 weren't moving to, suddenly new office space or new clinic space.
Yeah.
This has been space that's been around since 2019 at least, or opened up since 2019.
Also, and that was interesting to me because since I don't live in Seattle, I didn't necessarily know what this new building was for, right? So part of me assumed, right, like it's the VA hospital. Maybe there's clinic spaces, maybe a new OR. I don't know. But it's mostly for research. So it's office spaces, right? Which Building 18 has these clinics that I think what, we've realized is maybe there's just not enough new clinic space for people to move into, or they're, reconfiguring and whatever. So that was an interesting planning thing too. Why would you pour so much money into a new space that doesn't accommodate the actual medical care? So
has anything happened since the story went up? Have you heard anything more from the VA or from anyone else?
We've heard every day from our sources that the clinic is still open. Mm-hmm. We get a picture almost every day from them. We've had a few more people reach out. So we're interested to kind of see who reads the story and who else is interested in talking with us. And maybe about other buildings on the VA, because there's a lot of old buildings on that campus.
Yeah. There's some meetings coming up too that we're aware of, both of like advocacy committees for veterans that are, this is a big issue to them. And then also there's, meetings with VA leadership possibly. So we're, continuing to check in with our sources about those. But we have not heard directly anything from the VA since the story published.
Are there any concrete plans to pursue further reporting right now? Or are you going to kind of wait and see what happens in the next few months?
Yeah, we are planning to continue reporting on this, I think, both from the standpoint of, when will this building close? What's going to happen next? We are curious about some other concerns folks have expressed about other buildings on the campus that I think we'd like to look into. And just also, maybe talk with other people that were impacted by this. Right, like we've kind of hinted at this, but this was all going on during the pandemic, which was a respiratory illness that was a huge concern of being with people in tight spaces where there wasn't a lot of airflow. And that's exactly what this building was. And so I think finding out how many people maybe got sick or just like that was a concern, right? So many people during the pandemic, it was really scary. And I think that we haven't gotten to report on that as much. So I would like to see if we're able to, if people are willing to share.
Yeah, most definitely. We're going to follow up on this. Is the building really going to be closed in the next couple months? Because that's one thing we really wanted to ask the VA. Like, what does a couple months mean? Is this 2 months? Is this 6 months? And we never got a concrete answer. So it'll be interesting to kind of still follow up and, see what's going on.
Yeah.
And we're always looking to hear from more people. So if you have a tip you want to talk about, either anonymously or giving your name, please reach out. We're interested to see what kind of lasting impact or what kind of impact the building conditions had on patients and staff.
I think also, too, if I can add, just like we want to be a resource for folks, too. So maybe not necessarily even folks reaching out with like a story tip or wanting to share something on the record. But like I can imagine, if you're reading this and your loved one is a veteran, or if you yourself are and seek care, like you might have some questions. So Lizz and I are very accessible, and we'd always be happy to sit down and talk with people, answer questions over email. Like I think that can be really useful. A story like this that might have a fairly wide impact on folks.
Thanks for listening to Northwest Reports. This episode was reported by Lauren Gallup and Lizz Giordano. It was produced by me, Maleeha Syed, and Sarah Bernard. The story editor was Ryan Famuliner. Our executive producer is Sarah Menzies. You can subscribe to Northwest Reports wherever you listen. And whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. Just a quick reminder, we're not going to publish Northwest Reports on a weekly basis anymore, but we will be back with our first reported series this fall. Also, if you would like to support the work we do at Cascade PBS, whether it's our lineup of podcasts, the video docuseries we stream every week, or the in-depth reporting we deliver every day, go to crosscut.com/membership. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive complete access to the on-demand programming of Cascade PBS. For the latest political, environmental, and culture news from the Pacific Northwest, visit crosscut.com. That's also where you'll find a text version of the story we discussed today. Northwest Reports is a product of Cascade PBS. I'm Maleeha Syed. We'll be back soon with another episode.